half full kind of person. Think about that a minute. We all tend to go one way or the other. Sometimes we're a little of both, but we tend to have one side of that personality or not. We tend to be either kind of positive or we tend to think the worst. Paul today is an example of a glass half full kind of guy. Paul and Timothy are in prison in Rome. And here he is writing this positive letter, this happy letter about thanking the community in Philippi for being there for him. Being in prison in Rome was not like being in prison today. It could mean your death. The Romans, if they put you in prison, didn't care if you lived or died. In fact, they'd rather get rid of you and let you die. And if you didn't have somebody to bring you food and blankets and things to keep you warm and to keep you nourished, you just starved to death. They didn't take care of you. They didn't provide 3 square meals a day. They didn't provide anything. If you got sick, you died. And we don't know how often they cleaned out the dead bodies from the prison. So it wasn't a pleasant place to be. And you really were dependent on family, friends, somebody to take care of you, or it was a death sentence to be put in prison. And so here are Paul and Timothy in whatever kind of prison, whether it's a hole in the ground or a cave, we don't know, but they're in prison, chained, and Paul writes this amazing letter. It's a lot of people's favorite letter in the New Testament because he is so upbeat and so happy. And yet he's living in these deplorable conditions. But he is grateful. The Philippi community, the Philippians have come together and collected things for him and have brought him food. And have brought him, a representative from the community brought food and blankets and medicine and whatever you would need for both he and Timothy. And Paul is grateful. And he talks about them. He doesn't talk about himself. He doesn't say, "For me, you should see where I am and what this is like." Instead, he talks about them. And he uses words when he talks about them of gratitude and joy. He talks about happiness because they spread the good news, even when it's tough, like keeping a feather in the air. He says, "I love you," and he says, "I long for all of you." And he calls them blameless and pure at heart and filled with the fruit produced by Jesus to bring glory and praise to God. That's pretty amazing if you think about it. How to stay so upbeat. It's a little easier for us. But Paul is letting that faith community know how important they are to him. And that's something we need to remember. We sometimes take each other for granted. We forget to say thank you to each other for showing up on Sundays, for supporting each other, for doing things for each other. And I thought today might be a good way to do that, to say thank you to each other by just affirming what are the things that you love about St. Peter. What are the things you love about being part of this faith community? So Ruth Ann is going to write, all you need to do is call out one word things. Ruth Ann is going to write for us, keep a record of it, because I think it might help you in the next months. But what are things you love about being part of this faith community and appreciate it? Wendy? Family. Just call them up.
Friends.
Friends.
All friends.
We're all friends. So. Relationships and what else?
Lifetime friends.
Lifetime friends.
A sense of belonging.
A sense of belonging. Support. Love.
Witness.
Witness.
Team.
Okay, you like a team. Okay.
Support.
Support.
Fellowship.
Fellowship. Parenting.
The children.
The children.
Family.
I didn't quite get that. I'm sorry.
Sorry, Vincent.
I think we're there. Okay.
The building.
The building. Okay.
Your leadership.
Thank you. Okay. And that's good to think about. You can always add to that list. Tell a council member sometime. It's good to say thank you, to appreciate what we have here. It's an important thing to do. We don't do it enough. You know, I appreciate who you are and all you are. I don't know if I've said it lately, but this has been my favorite call so far. So I really enjoy being here with you. And while I'm on the subject, Bill, why don't you stand up a sec? Bill has joined St. Peter. Okay, thank you for joining us. I think that's important that you know. He's thought about it for a long time, and he's a lot of times here anyway. But he's finally decided to join because of you. I'm going to tell you that part of that story that he told me is that when they first moved to town, he came to church with Mary Ellen, and nobody talked to them. This is a long time ago. Nobody said anything to them, and they tried to talk to people, and people said, oh, and walked away from them because they didn't know them. They were new in town, and nobody knew them. And so they went to Mary Ellen's church. Bill was from the Congregational Church, and that had closed. And so they went up to southern Minnesota to go to Mary Ellen's church every Sunday. So I just want to point that out, that how much this congregation has changed. How much you've grown and how much more welcoming, because now he wants to be a part of you. And he feels welcomed and cared about here. So I want you all to know that. And I think that's a wonderful compliment to all of you. And Paul kind of guides us in this letter. I think over the next couple of weeks as we read this letter, we'll have other opportunities to talk about what faith community means. And I think it's just important to name any time, especially since you're heading into a time of transition. It helps you to do that. You know, it's hard to be church. It's not always easy to be church. And we grow and we change, and thank goodness, because that's important to do. We come to understand who we are and what we're about and what God is calling us to do in different times and different eras, and different, as our culture changes, so do we adapt and change. But to think about, what are your dreams for the future for this church? What are your hopes for this church? Those are things to keep in mind over the summer months. And change and transition is always difficult. And that's what kind of gets us to stop and think. You know, none of us likes change a great deal. Timothy and Paul were all about change. Their lives were constantly changing. They were constantly traveling, being put in prison for sometimes long periods of time, sometimes short periods of time. But Paul was all about doing preaching his work by establishing partnerships. He either traveled with Barnabas or Timothy. He traveled with Luke, the gospel writer Luke, who wrote Acts of the Apostles, was one of the, he recorded a lot of what Paul did, but he never names himself. He was one of the travelers. Paul, when he started a Christian community, he worked out partnerships. He worked with people. He helped them surface what their gifts were, and who could do what. Who was good at leading worship? Who was good at hospitality and serving Holy Communion, who was good at all of caring for the sick, for the needy, all those things. He did that out of getting to know people, establishing relationships, and working in partnership with them, which is why he wrote so many letters to keep in touch with them, to keep that relationship alive, to keep that going. That was so important to him. Philippians also, he talks in the latter part of this reading today about unity, how important unity is. We know that in this Christian community, he talks a little bit about those who are trying to preach the gospel out of jealousy or competitiveness. And where that comes from is there were two women in the Philippi community who were at odds with each other. And they were causing division in the community. And you know what happens when people start arguing and there's division. Either they're out the door or they take sides. And that always hurts the community. And so what Paul is doing is saying it's more important to think about who you are as a group. The relationship comes first. Unity comes first. And then individual needs. You know, let go of your jealousies, let go of your petty arguments. That's not important. What's important is who we are and what's best for the faith community. And that's not easy to do sometimes, especially living in our time because we are such an individualistic culture. We're taught to be that way. We're taught to take care of our own needs, that somebody will, if we look hard enough, we'll find somebody that will give us what we want. And we want it on our time, and if you don't do it the way I want it and when I want it, I'll go somewhere else and find it. That's just kind of our culture these days. And Paul is being very countercultural for us and saying the unity of community, sorry for the rhyme, is what matters the most. You hold that relationship up first, and you do whatever it takes to keep that alive and nurtured and healthy. And then you worry about the individuals. Just opposite of most of our thinking. So that's something to challenge us with. How do we put the needs of the community over our individual needs? And how do we make concessions and work together and compromise so that the needs of the community are met first? And that we stay united and caring and hospitable and welcoming and all those things we need to be alive, to be Christ's work in the world. Be Christ's hands and feet. Paul calls himself a slave of Christ. Now what that's all about is, it sounds that's another cultural thing that sounds funny to us. We don't have any positive thoughts about slavery. And so to hear that it doesn't work real well for us. But what that's about is that in the Roman Empire, a slave was an extension of the slave's master. And so a slave of an emperor, for instance, had more status than a lot of other people because he or she was seen as an extension of the emperor. And so that gave them a lot of status, even though they had to do everything the emperor said and were at his bidding. But it was still that gave him status over most other people because the emperor had so much status. Of course, at the top of the ladder, you might say. And so that worked all the way down. So anybody that was poor didn't have as much status as a slave of somebody who was rich and powerful. So Paul is saying he is a slave of Christ, an extension of Christ. Think about that. We're all called to be extensions of Christ. I don't know if you've thought about that lately, but when I think about that, it makes me stop and say, I need to be careful about what I say. I need to be more thoughtful about how I treat people. Because I'm an extension of Christ in the world. And everybody I meet should be treated as Christ would treat them. And every decision I make needs to be about what would Christ do. Remember that ad back some years ago where we all wore bracelets that said, "What would Jesus do?" WWJD. It's kind of that thing. That's a little simplified, but it's that idea that I'm an extension of Christ. You are an extension of Christ. So I invite you to think about that this week. How are you an extension of Christ, and how do you live that out? And how are you being Christ for those you meet in the world? Because as a faith community, we're called to be an extension of Christ to the whole world, which is really hard to think about, if you will. But together we're called to be an extension to everyone, to the whole world. So let's think about what that means for each one of us as we, again, our culture for each one of us. For Christ, as we live out our week this week and encounter the people who will be part of our lives. Amen. And let's sing together at the end of the day. Blessed Assurance, number 638.
Christ, Holy Spirit, born of the Virgin Mary, suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, died, and was buried. He descended to the dead. On the third day he rose again. He ascended into heaven. He is seated at the right hand of the Father, and he will come to judge the living and the dead. I believe in the Holy Spirit, the Holy Catholic Church, the communion of saints, the forgiveness of sins, the resurrection of the body, and the life everlasting. Amen.
We pray for peace in our world. We pray for our nation. We pray for the leaders of our nation that they allow themselves to be guided by the Holy Spirit and act out of God's love. We pray for gratitude for celebrations and happy times in our lives. We pray for Ann and Zach as they begin their life together. We pray for our friends. We pray for our families. We pray for all those who are sick. We pray for those who grieve. We pray for our communities and the churches of our communities. And together, we answer God's call to be Christ in the world. We pray for St. Peter and Paul that we grow in numbers and in our understanding and mission. Let's sing again.